The night sliced through the village with a heavy silence, while the wind howled through the forest as if the gods themselves were protesting. In the midst of the snow lay a barely visible trembling silhouette. A child, a girl whose eyes reflected both fear and fire, a fire her own clan had decided to extinguish. Then, from afar, the sound of heavy footsteps approached, a solitary figure casting the shadow of a berserker. Come with me. What you're about to witness is a tale of broken loyalty, redemption, and the invisible force that binds us when all seems lost. 24 hours earlier, Sigtrygg Ravnsson awoke to the smell of smoke and the overcast sky reflecting the harshness of winter that plagued the fjord of Elderheim. The first light of dawn crept reluctantly through the cracks of his weathered cabin walls. At 33, he was a warrior marked not only by battles, but by solitude. Each morning began the same way, with the weight of memories pressing against his chest before his eyes even opened. He rose from his bed of furs, joints cracking in protest. The fire in the hearth had dwindled to embers overnight, leaving the air inside almost as bitter as outside. Sigtrygg added kindling with practiced movements. His large hands, once known for their ability to wield an axe with deadly precision, now performing this mundane task with quiet resignation. Another day, he muttered to himself, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Once a feared berserker, now a recluse, his routine had distilled to simplicity. Tend to the meager lands that remained his, maintain the improvised forge behind his dwelling, and avoid the gaze of those who called him cursed. The clan had cast him aside, not out of fear for his weakness, but terror of what he represented. A man who had seen the darkness of battle rage and returned, forever changed. Sigtrygg pulled on his worn boots and wrapped himself in his wolf-pelt cloak, a reminder of his last successful hunt before exile. The garment was fraying at the edges now, like his connection to the world of men. He ate a simple breakfast of hard bread and dried meat, washing it down with water so cold it burned his throat. Outside, the world was painted in shades of white and gray. The fjord stretched before him, its waters partially frozen near the shore, dark and foreboding farther out. The wind carried the scent of burning wood and the creaking of the village timbers, while the distant sound of breaking ice disrupted the silence. From his isolated position on the outskirts, Sigtrygg could see smoke rising from the longhouses of Elderheim, where families gathered around hearths, sharing warmth and stories, comforts denied to him for 3 winters now. He began his day's labor by clearing snow from the entrance to his cabin, his breath creating plumes of white that dissipated into the colorless sky. The repetitive motion of scraping and shoveling allowed his mind to drift, as it often did, to memories of battles long past, the clash of steel, the coppery taste of blood in the air, the battle fury that had once consumed him like fire. The clan feared that fury. They called it a curse from Odin himself, the berserk rage that transformed men into beasts. Sigtrygg had controlled it for years while serving as the clan's protector, but when that rage had claimed the life of a fellow warrior during a raid gone wrong, the judgment had been swift. Exile or death. He chose the former, though some days, as he looked out over the unforgiving landscape, he wondered if he had chosen correctly. As he worked, pushing snow into piles alongside the narrow path to his door, a sound cut through the air, different from the usual morning chorus of wind and distant village life. A stifled sob, carried from the direction of the forest that bordered his meager property. Sigtrygg paused, shovel suspended mid-action, head tilted to confirm what he'd heard. The sound came again, weak but unmistakable, human, suffering. Sigtrygg's heart tightened with an instinct he couldn't ignore. He set the shovel against the cabin wall and moved toward the tree line, his hand instinctively reaching for the axe that hung at his belt. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he approached the dense pines, their branches heavy with snow and ice. His eyes, trained by years of hunting and warfare, scanned the shadows beneath the trees. There, a patch of disturbed snow, a trail of uneven footprints leading deeper into the forest. Someone had stumbled this way, recently. The tracks were small, much too small for an adult. Sigtrygg followed, moving with surprising grace for a man of his size. Between broken branches and dead leaves protruding from the snow, he found her. The girl lay curled upon herself like a wounded animal, half buried in snow that had begun to cover her still form. Her skin was pallid, marked by cold and recent injuries. Dark bruises visible on her exposed arms, a cut above one eye crusted with dried blood. But it was her eyes that captured Sigtrygg, gray as the winter sky and bright with an unspeakable fear when they fluttered open at his approach. They locked onto him, widened, then narrowed with a flash of recognition. Astrid, Sigtrygg breathed, the name escaping his lips before he could contain it. He knew her. Everyone in the clan knew the chieftain's daughter, or rather, former daughter, for the rumors had reached even his isolated cabin. Astrid Ravnsson's daughter, banished for a crime known only to her and the clan elders, abandoned to her fate rather than stain the family name with a proper execution. 12 winters old, and cast out like unwanted livestock. The girl's lips moved, but no sound emerged. Her small body trembled violently, whether from fear or cold, Sigtrygg couldn't tell. Probably both. A thin layer of ice had formed on her eyelashes, and her short, dirty blonde hair was matted with snow. Sigtrygg felt the weight of the world settle upon his shoulders. To help her meant defying everything he had believed in, the clan's judgment, the chieftain's will, the very laws that governed their society. It meant reviving ghosts of his past he'd tried desperately to bury. It meant risking what little peace he had carved for himself in this harsh existence. And yet, "I shouldn't," he said aloud, though whether to himself or the girl he wasn't certain. Astrid's eyes never left his face. In them, Sigtrygg saw something that pierced the armor he had built around his heart. Not just fear or pain, but a silent plea for something he couldn't name. Something he himself had sought when the clan turned their backs on him. A chance. His hesitation lasted only moments before the warmth of empathy conquered it. With a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, Sigtrygg knelt in the snow beside the child. He removed his cloak and wrapped it gently around her battered form, noting how she flinched at his touch before surrendering to the sudden warmth. "Come," he said simply, gathering her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a bird with hollow bones. As he lifted her, Sigtrygg felt her small body go rigid before reluctantly relaxing against his chest. Her head lolled against his shoulder, consciousness slipping away now that someone else had taken the burden of survival from her shoulders. Sigtrygg carried her back to his cabin, his heart pounding between fear and hope. With each step through the deepening snow, he felt as though the threads of their fates were being woven together by the Norns themselves. What that pattern would reveal, he could not guess, but he knew with certainty that nothing would be the same after this day. The door to his cabin groaned as he pushed it open with his shoulder, ducking to enter with his fragile burden. Inside, the embers in the hearth still glowed, offering the promise of warmth. Sigtrygg laid Astrid gently on his bed of furs, noting the blue tinge to her lips, the shallow rise and fall of her chest. "You're safe now," he told her, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him, or if his words were true. He added wood to the fire until flames leapt high, bathing the small cabin in golden light and precious heat. Then he turned back to the task of saving this child, who, like himself, had been deemed unworthy of the clan's protection. As he gathered clean cloths and water to tend her wounds, Sigtrygg couldn't help but wonder if this act of mercy would be his final defiance against the clan that had rejected them both, or the beginning of something neither of them could foresee. Sigtrygg knelt beside the bed, studying the girl's face in the firelight. Beneath the dirt and bruises, he could see the resemblance to her brother, Eirik, the current chieftain. The same proud line of the jaw, though softened by youth. The same determined set of the brow, even in unconsciousness. But where Eirik's features were hard as stone, Astrid's held a gentleness that reminded Sigtrygg of spring thaw after the longest winter. "What did you do," he whispered, "that was so terrible they would cast you out to die?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Sigtrygg knew that by morning he would need to decide what came next. For now, all that mattered was keeping death from the door of his cabin, and from the small, broken figure who had stumbled into his life like a sign from the gods. Whether blessing or curse, only time would tell. Inside the cabin, the fire cast dancing shadows across the weathered walls, transforming the humble dwelling into a realm of light and darkness engaged in perpetual struggle. Sigtrygg worked methodically, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he tended to Astrid. He heated water until steam rose from the iron pot, then soaked a clean cloth in the warm liquid. With careful movements, he began to cleanse the dirt and blood from her face, each touch a silent promise of protection. The girl's eyes fluttered open at the sensation of warmth against her skin. For a moment, panic flashed across her features, the instinctive fear of a wounded animal. She tried to pull away, her thin arms pushing weakly against the furs. "Be still," Sigtrygg said, his voice low and steady. "I mean you no harm." Astrid's gaze darted around the unfamiliar surroundings before settling on his face. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by confusion. Her lips parted, but only a dry rasp emerged. Sigtrygg reached for a wooden cup, filled it with water, and held it to her mouth. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin in her desperation to quench her thirst. "Slowly," he cautioned, pulling the cup back slightly. "Too much at once will make you sick." She obeyed, sipping more carefully, until the cup was empty. When Sigtrygg set it aside and resumed cleaning her wounds, she didn't resist. Her eyes, however, never left him. Wary, assessing, searching for intent in every movement. They spoke volumes. Distrust born of betrayal, pain that ran deeper than physical wounds, and, beneath it all, a flicker of hope she seemed afraid to acknowledge. A particularly deep cut above her eyebrow made her wince when he touched it. Sigtrygg frowned. "This needs stitching," he said, more to himself than to her. He rose and gathered what he needed: a bone needle, thread made from animal sinew, and a small jar of honey to ward off infection. When he returned to her side, Astrid's eyes widened at the sight of the needle. "It will hurt," Sigtrygg admitted, "but without it, the wound won't heal properly." The girl's jaw tightened, and she gave a single curt nod. Permission granted. As Sigtrygg prepared to make the first stitch, he was struck by her composure. Children her age usually feared pain, yet here she sat, bracing herself with a dignity that spoke of lessons learned too young. He worked as quickly as he could. Each pierce of the needle met with only the slightest intake of breath from his patient. "You're brave," he said when he finished, applying honey to the freshly stitched wound. Astrid didn't respond, but something in her posture softened slightly at the praise. The silence between them grew heavy, filled with unspoken questions and histories neither was ready to share. Sigtrygg moved to his small table, breaking off a piece of dry bread from his meager stores. He offered it to Astrid, who hesitated only briefly before accepting, her small hand trembling as it brushed against his calloused palm. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing urgency as her body remembered its hunger. Sigtrygg added a strip of dried venison, watching as she devoured that too. When she finished, exhaustion claimed her once more, her eyelids growing heavy despite her evident struggle to remain alert. "Sleep," Sigtrygg told her. "No harm will come to you here." Whether she believed him or simply couldn't fight her fatigue any longer, Astrid surrendered to sleep, her body curling instinctively beneath the furs. Sigtrygg remained seated beside her, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, contemplating the strange turn his solitary existence had taken. They were strangers bound by a common fate, the rejected child, the exiled warrior, both marked by the cruelty of a world that prized strength above compassion, tradition above justice. In her sleeping face, Sigtrygg saw a reflection of his own past wounds, and something protective stirred within him, a feeling he had thought long dead. Outside, the wind howled with renewed fury, rattling the shutters of the cabin as if demanding entry. The storm that had been threatening all morning had arrived in earnest, blanketing the world in white and erasing tracks, including those that led from the forest to Sigtrygg's door. A temporary reprieve, he knew. Such things could not remain hidden forever. As morning stretched into afternoon, Sigtrygg busied himself with quiet tasks, mending a torn tunic, sharpening his hunting knife, occasionally adding wood to the fire. Each time Astrid stirred in her sleep, he paused, watching for signs of fever or distress. Once she called out in her dreams, words he couldn't decipher, but delivered with such anguish that he found himself moving to her side, a hand hovering uncertainly above her shoulder, before withdrawing without making contact. What right did he have to offer comfort? He who had failed to protect so many. The day passed slowly, and as the short winter sun began its early descent, Sigtrygg's thoughts turned to the growing danger. By now, someone might have noticed the girl's absence from wherever she had been banished to. Or perhaps not. Perhaps they had truly abandoned her to the mercy of the elements, expecting nature to complete what they lacked the courage to finish themselves. Either way, Sigtrygg knew the respite couldn't last. The storm would end. Hunters would venture out. News traveled quickly in small communities, even to those on the margins. If Astrid had been seen near his property, word would reach Sigtrygg Ravnsson soon enough. And then what? The question hung over Sigtrygg like the blade of an executioner's axe as he stoked the fire against the coming night. He had no illusions about his standing with the clan. To them, he was already a pariah, a harbinger of misfortune who dared to live within sight of their village. Harboring the chieftain's banished sister would not merely be seen as defiance. It would be an unforgivable challenge to Sigtrygg's authority. The sound of movement from the bed interrupted his brooding. Astrid was awake, propped up on one elbow, watching him with those unsettlingly perceptive eyes. "You should eat again," Sigtrygg said, moving to fetch more food. The girl sat up fully, wincing as her body protested the movement. When Sigtrygg returned with bread and a cup of thin broth, she accepted both without hesitation this time. He noticed how she held the warm cup between her palms for long moments before drinking, savoring the heat as much as the sustenance. "They'll come for me," she said suddenly, her voice startling in the quiet cabin. Small but clear, with a certainty that belied her years. They were the first words she had spoken since he found her, and they landed between them with the weight of prophecy. Sigtrygg considered denying it, offering false reassurance, but something in her gaze told him she would recognize the lie. Yes, he agreed, eventually. Astrid nodded, as if his confirmation merely verified what she already knew. She sipped her broth, eyes now fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth. "Why did you help me?" she asked after a long silence. The question caught Sigtrygg unprepared. Why indeed? He had survived these past years by minding his own affairs, by becoming as inconsequential to the clan as possible. Taking in the banished sister of the chieftain was the opposite of self-preservation. "I couldn't leave you to die," he said finally, the simplicity of the answer surprising even himself. "Others did," Astrid replied, her tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. The truth of her words struck Sigtrygg like a physical blow. He had no response that wouldn't sound hollow, so he offered none, letting silence fill the space between them once more. After a while, Astrid spoke again, her voice softer. "They say you killed a man of our clan, that the battle madness took you." Sigtrygg stiffened. Of course she would know the stories. Every child in the village would have heard them, whispered as warnings. "They say many things," he answered carefully. "Did you?" Her directness was unnerving, her gaze unflinching. Sigtrygg considered lying, but found he couldn't, not to this child, who had already endured so much deception. "Yes," he admitted, "but not as they tell it." Astrid waited, expectant, and Sigtrygg found himself speaking of things he had not voiced in years. How the raid on the neighboring settlement had gone wrong, how they were ambushed, outnumbered, how he had entered the battle fury, not out of bloodlust, but desperation, to save what remained of their raiding party. How in the chaos and darkness he had struck down Gorm Skallagrimsson, mistaking him for an enemy. "I never denied responsibility," Sigtrygg concluded, "but neither was I the monster they claimed." He expected judgment, fear, perhaps. Instead, Astrid nodded slowly, a look of understanding beyond her years crossing her features. "They needed someone to blame," she said quietly, "just as they needed to blame me." The parallel hung between them, a thread connecting their separate exiles. Before Sigtrygg could ask what crime had earned her banishment, a sound from outside froze them both, the distant but unmistakable baying of hounds. Astrid's face drained of what little color it had regained. "They're coming," she whispered. Sigtrygg moved quickly to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. The storm had abated somewhat, and in the fading light he could make out movement at the edge of the village, torches being lit, men gathering. Hunting dogs strained against leashes, eager for the chase. "Not yet," he said. "They're preparing, but they won't set out until morning. The trail is too difficult to follow in darkness." Relief flickered across her face, but it was short-lived. "What will you do when they come here?" It was the question Sigtrygg had been asking himself since he carried her through his door. What would he do? Return her without resistance? Fight? Flee? None seemed to offer a path that didn't end in blood or greater suffering. "I don't know," he answered honestly. Astrid drew her knees up to her chest, making herself smaller beneath the furs. For a moment she looked exactly what she was, a frightened child caught in the machinations of adults who should have protected her. "I can leave," she offered, though her voice trembled at the prospect. "Before they come, they'll have no reason to harm you then." The selflessness of her suggestion, this wounded girl willing to face certain death to spare him trouble, stirred something in Sigtrygg's chest, a resolve he had thought long extinguished. "No," he said firmly, "you'll stay." Night fell fully, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that even the fire struggled against. Sigtrygg added more wood, watching as sparks spiraled up the chimney like fleeing stars. Outside, the wind had calmed, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the occasional crack of a frost-strained branch. "They'll come at first light," he said, more to himself than to Astrid. The girl had fallen into a fitful doze, exhaustion finally overcoming fear. Sigtrygg watched her sleep, his mind churning with half-formed plans and discarded strategies. By morning, he would need to have decided their course, and he suspected that whatever he chose would set them both on a path from which there was no returning. The night deepened, stars emerging in the clear sky like ice crystals. In the village, preparations continued, torches moving like earthbound fireflies as men readied for the hunt, not for game this time, but for a child, and the man who dared defy their judgment by showing mercy. The news that Astrid had been seen with Sigtrygg reached Elderheim with the swiftness of ill tidings. A hunter, returning early from checking his traps, had spotted the former Berserker carrying what appeared to be a child toward his isolated cabin. The hunter, keeping a cautious distance, had recognized the small figure by her distinctive pale hair, visible even beneath a layer of grime. Word spread through the village like fire through dry tinder. Whispers became murmurs, murmurs grew to concerned discussions, and by midday a crowd had gathered outside the great hall, demanding audience with their chieftain. Inside, Sigtrygg Ravnsson sat upon the high seat that had been his father's, his face impassive as he listened to the hunter's account. "You're certain it was my sister?" he asked, his voice betraying no emotion. The hunter nodded vigorously. "Yes, my lord. Though she looked near death, I'd stake my honor on it being Astrid." Sigtrygg's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the arms of his chair. 3 days had passed since he had personally escorted Astrid to the edge of clan territory, since he had turned his back on her pleading eyes and walked away without looking back. 3 days in which he had told himself it was necessary, that the law demanded it, that as chieftain he could show no favoritism, even to his own blood. 3 days in which he had not slept through the night. "And you're equally certain she was taken by Sigtrygg Ravnsson?" he pressed. "Carried in his arms like a precious burden," the hunter confirmed, a note of distaste entering his voice. The outcast seemed protective of her. A murmur ran through the assembled elders and warriors. Sigtrygg's name still evoked strong reactions within the clan, fear, anger, lingering respect from some who remembered his valor before the incident that led to his exile. That he would involve himself with the chieftain's banished sister was seen not merely as foolish, but provocative. "What would you have us do, chieftain?" asked Gunnar, the eldest of the council, his white beard nearly reaching his belt. "The girl was judged and sentenced according to our laws. Her fate was decided." "And Sigtrygg interfered with that judgment," added Hakon, a burly warrior who had never hidden his dislike for the former Berserker. "He challenges your authority, Sigtrygg." The chieftain rose from his seat, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the fire-lit hall. At 38, Sigtrygg Ravnsson cut an imposing figure, broad-shouldered and battle-scarred, with raven-black hair cropped short in the style of a man who had no patience for vanity. The deep scar that bisected his right cheek pulled his mouth into a perpetual half-grimace, giving him an appearance of constant displeasure that served him well in maintaining discipline. "Sigtrygg oversteps," Sigtrygg declared, pacing before the central hearth. "He was permitted to live on the borders of our territory out of respect for his past service, not so he could undermine clan judgments." He stopped, staring into the flames as if seeking wisdom there. The assembled men waited, sensing their chieftain's internal conflict. Despite his fearsome reputation, Sigtrygg was known for measured decisions, not rash action. "Perhaps," ventured Gunnar cautiously, "the girl has already perished from her ordeal. Sigtrygg may simply be providing funeral rites." A convenient solution, implied but not stated. If Astrid were already dead, the matter would resolve itself without further clan involvement. Sigtrygg could maintain his authority without additional bloodshed. "And if she lives?" challenged Hakon. "If the outcast harbors her, nurses her back to health, what then? Do we allow anyone to defy clan judgment without consequence?" Sigtrygg's jaw tightened. The question echoed his own thoughts too closely for comfort. As chieftain, he walked a narrow path. Justice without cruelty, strength without tyranny. His father had taught him that leadership meant making decisions others could not or would not make, bearing burdens that would break lesser men. Banishing Astrid had been such a burden. "We will know by morning," Sigtrygg decided. "Prepare a party of 6 men. We leave at first light for Sigtrygg's cabin. Bring the hounds. They'll track her if she's fled elsewhere." He paused, scanning the faces around him. "I will lead the party myself." This last announcement silenced even the most vocal among them. For the chieftain to personally involve himself in what could be handled by subordinates signaled the gravity with which he viewed the situation, and perhaps, though none dared suggest it aloud, his personal stake in its resolution. "And when we find them?" asked Gunnar, his aged voice gentle but insistent. Eric's eyes hardened. "If my sister lives, her sentence stands. As for Sigtrygg—" He let the thought hang unfinished, a threat more effective for its ambiguity. The meeting dispersed, men hurrying to prepare for the morning's grim task. Eric remained by the fire, his thoughts as turbulent as the flames before him. In his mind's eye he saw Astrid as she had been before, not the condemned girl he had abandoned at the forest's edge, but the sister who had once followed him adoringly, who had woven flowers into the manes of his war horses, who had sung the old songs better than anyone in the village. And unbidden another image arose, Sigtrygg Ravnsson as he had once been, the chieftain's most trusted warrior, a man who had saved Eric's own life in battle more than once, a man who had been like a brother before the Berserker rage claimed him, and with it any place in the clan's future. Now these ghosts from his past had converged, forcing Eric to confront decisions he had made as chieftain, but still questioned as a man. "Be resolute," he muttered to himself, his father's favorite counsel. Outside the great hall, the village buzzed with anticipation. Judgments and punishments were public affairs in clan life, lessons for all, reminders of the cost of transgression. Some spoke of Astrid with pity, others with righteous condemnation. None questioned the justice of her sentence openly,
Though in private corners, mothers held their own daughters closer and wondered what they might do in similar circumstances. Sigtrygg's involvement added an element of spectacle to what might otherwise have been a simple, if tragic, enforcement of clan law. The former Berserker had become something of a legend in his absence, a cautionary tale, a bogeyman to frighten children, a symbol of uncontrolled power. That he would risk what little peace he had secured to protect a banished child confused Rennie and infuriated others. By nightfall, the hunting party was assembled, 6 warriors hand-picked by Eirik for their tracking skills and unwavering loyalty. Weapons were sharpened, provisions packed, hounds fed and rested for the morning's work. The mood was somber rather than eager. Even the most hardened among them took no pleasure in the thought of confronting a child already punished once. As for Eirik, he spent the night alone in his chambers, a cup of strong mead untouched before him, staring at the small wooden figurine of a wolf that Astrid had carved for him on his ascension to chieftain. His last gift from her, given with pride and love before everything changed. Before she broke clan law in a way that could not be forgiven. Before he was forced to choose between being a chieftain and being a brother. Dawn would come soon enough, bringing with it a confrontation none involved truly wanted, but all recognized as inevitable. The wheels of fate, set in motion by a child's transgression and a warrior's compassion, could not be halted now, only guided toward whatever end the gods had decreed. And in a small cabin at the edge of the forest, Sigtrygg Ravnsson kept vigil through the night, preparing in his own way for the storm that would break with the morning light. The first pale light of dawn found Sigtrygg already awake, standing at his cabin's single window, watching as color slowly bled into the monochrome landscape. He had slept little, dozing fitfully in a chair near the hearth, one ear always alert for sounds of approach. Now, with morning creeping over the horizon, he knew their borrowed time was running short. Behind him, Astrid stirred on the bed, her eyes opening to the unfamiliar ceiling. For a moment, confusion clouded her features, before memory returned, bringing with it the weight of their situation. She sat up carefully, wincing as her body reminded her of its injuries. "They'll be coming soon," Sigtrygg said, without turning from the window. Astrid pulled the furs closer around her shoulders, seeking warmth against more than just the morning chill. "I know." Sigtrygg had spent the night considering their options, discarding each as quickly as it formed. Flight seemed futile, the girl was in no condition to travel swiftly, and the snow would make their tracks easy to follow. Fighting would only end in bloodshed, likely his own, leaving Astrid unprotected once more. Surrender meant returning her to the fate she had narrowly escaped. No clear path presented itself, yet a decision had to be made. He turned from the window, studying the girl in the growing light. Sleep and food had brought some color back to her cheeks, and the worst of her wounds had begun to heal. Still, she remained painfully vulnerable, a sapling after a harsh frost, bent but not yet broken. "Eat," he said, moving to the hearth where a pot of porridge had been warming. "You'll need your strength." As he ladled the simple meal into wooden bowls, Sigtrygg found himself wondering what crime could have been severe enough to warrant a child's banishment. Among their people, even serious transgressions by the young were usually met with lesser punishments: public shaming, additional labor, temporary exclusion from community gatherings. Banishment was reserved for the gravest offenses: murder, betrayal of the clan, blasphemy against the gods.
What could a 12-year-old girl have done to deserve such a fate? He handed Astrid her portion, noting how she accepted it with both hands, careful not to spill a drop of the precious sustenance. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional distant call of a winter bird. "Will you ask me?" Astrid said suddenly, her gaze fixed on her nearly empty bowl. Sigtrygg paused mid-bite. "Ask you what? Why they cast me out?" Her voice was steady, but her knuckles had whitened around the wooden bowl. "Everyone wants to know." Sigtrygg set his own bowl aside. "It changes nothing." "Doesn't it?" Astrid looked up at him then, her gray eyes challenging despite her youth. "You've taken me in without knowing what I did. Aren't you curious if I deserve this?" She gestured to her injured body, the borrowed furs, the exile implicit in her very presence in his cabin. "No one deserves to be left to die in the snow," Sigtrygg replied firmly, "least of all a child." Astrid's expression softened slightly, surprise and something like gratitude flickering across her features before she composed herself once more. "My brother would disagree." "Your brother is chieftain," Sigtrygg said, careful to keep judgment from his tone. "He answers to different gods than I do." This earned him the ghost of a smile, brief but genuine. It transformed her face, revealing the child she should have been allowed to remain. Before either could speak again, however, a new sound reached them, the faint but unmistakable baying of hounds in the distance. The smile vanished from Astrid's face. "They're coming." Sigtrygg nodded, rising to his feet in a fluid motion that belied his size. He moved to a wooden chest in the corner of the cabin, lifting its heavy lid to reveal neatly stored weapons, reminders of his former life. After a moment's consideration, he selected his battle axe, testing its familiar weight in his hand.
"I won't let them take you without a fight," he said, not looking at Astrid as he spoke. "They'll kill you," she replied, her voice small but certain. "Perhaps." Sigtrygg ran a thumb along the axe's edge, finding it still sharp despite years of disuse. But not easily. The hound's baying grew louder, accompanied now by the faint sound of men's voices. Sigtrygg estimated they had perhaps a quarter-hour before the hunting party reached his cabin. Not much time to prepare a defense, or to decide if defense was truly the wisest course. He turned to find Astrid watching him, her expression unreadable. "You could still surrender me," she said pragmatically. "Tell them you found me near death and took me in out of duty, not defiance. They might believe you. Eirik might spare you." The fact that she could suggest such a thing, offer herself as sacrifice to protect him, a virtual stranger, stirred something deep in Sigtrygg's chest. This child, despite everything she had endured, still possessed a courage and selflessness that shamed many adults he had known. "No," he said, the word carrying the weight of a vow. "That is not our path." Astrid studied him for a long moment, as if searching for deception or weakness in his resolve. Finding neither, she nodded once, acceptance rather than resignation in the gesture. "Then what will we do?" Sigtrygg moved to the window once more, gauging the approaching threat. The hunting party would come from the direction of the village, likely following the main path before cutting through the forest toward his cabin. 6 men, he guessed, possibly 8 if Eirik expected trouble. And the chieftain himself would surely lead them. This was too personal a matter to delegate. A confrontation seemed inevitable. But perhaps it didn't need to be violent. "We will speak truth to power," Sigtrygg decided, turning back to Astrid, "and hope that enough of the man I once knew remains in your brother to hear it." Outside, the hounds' baying suddenly intensified. They had caught a fresh scent, likely where Sigtrygg had carried Astrid from the forest to his cabin. Time was running shorter than he had estimated. "Dress warmly," he instructed, moving to gather his own cloak. "We'll meet them outside, in the open, not cornered like prey." As Astrid hurried to obey, wrapping herself in the extra clothing Sigtrygg provided, all absurdly large on her small frame, he made final preparations. He placed his axe within easy reach by the door, but did not take it up immediately. Instead, he stoked the fire one last time, ensuring the cabin would remain warm regardless of what transpired outside. A small gesture, perhaps foolish, but necessary. When they stepped outside, the cold air bit at their faces, the morning sun providing light but little warmth. Sigtrygg positioned himself in the clearing before his cabin, Astrid slightly behind him but still visible. He wanted Eirik to see her clearly, alive, recovering, under protection, but not hidden away like something shameful. The wait was brief. Within minutes, the hunting party emerged from the tree line, hounds straining at their leashes, warriors with hands on weapon hilts. At their center walked Sigtrygg Ravnsson, his face set in grim lines, his dark cloak billowing behind him in the winter wind. The chieftain raised a hand, halting his men at the edge of the clearing. For a long moment silence reigned, broken only by the panting of the hounds and the soft whisper of snow shifting in the breeze. Then Eirik stepped forward, alone, closing half the distance between them. "Sigtrygg Ravnsson," he called, his voice carrying easily across the open space. "You harbor one who has been cast out from our clan by lawful judgment. Surrender her, and perhaps your own punishment may be lessened." Sigtrygg stood his ground, making no move toward either submission or aggression. "I harbor one who was abandoned to die," he replied evenly. "A child, Eirik. Your own sister." The chieftain's face hardened at the implied accusation. "The law makes no exceptions for blood ties. You know this, I know this, even she knows this." His gaze shifted to Astrid, who met it without flinching. Her crime demanded banishment. "What crime could demand a child's death?" Sigtrygg challenged, the question hanging in the frigid air between them. For a moment, something like uncertainty flickered across Eirik's features before his expression closed once more. "That is clan business, not yours. You forfeited your right to question our judgments when you took the life of Gorm Skallagrimsson." The old accusation struck its intended mark, but Sigtrygg refused to be diverted. "I have paid for my crime with 3 years of exile," he said, "and would pay for 3 more if needed. But Astrid has committed no offense that justifies a death sentence disguised as banishment." Behind Eirik, the warriors shifted uncomfortably. Several exchanged glances, their certainty perhaps less absolute than their chieftain's. Sigtrygg noted this with a flicker of hope. Not all were convinced of the justice of Astrid's punishment. Eirik noticed it too, his jaw tightening. "You speak of matters you do not understand, Sigtrygg. Return my sister to me, and I give my word as chieftain that she will not be harmed further. She will be escorted to the boundaries of another clan, given provisions enough to reach their territory. A chance, not a death sentence. A compromise offered publicly." Sigtrygg weighed it carefully, aware that Eirik was granting what he likely considered a significant concession. But before he could respond, a small voice spoke from behind him. "I didn't do it." Astrid stepped forward, moving to stand beside Sigtrygg rather than in his shadow. Though she barely reached his elbow, there was nothing childlike in her bearing now. "I didn't steal the ritual blade, Eirik. I was blamed, but I never touched it."
A murmur ran through the assembled warriors. The ritual blade was a sacred artifact passed down through generations of clan leaders. Its theft would indeed be considered a grave offense, blasphemy against the gods themselves. But for one so young to be accused, Eric's expression darkened. The evidence was clear, Astrid. The blade was found among your possessions. Planted there, she insisted, her voice gaining strength. I was framed by someone who knew you would not question the evidence, who knew your position as chieftain would force you to dispense justice without favor. Enough! Eric's voice cracked like a whip. This matter was settled in council. I will not debate it again, especially not with a child and an outcast. But Sigtrygg had caught something in the chieftain's tone. Not anger alone, but discomfort, doubt. He pressed the advantage. If you truly believe in her guilt, Eric Ravnsson, then look her in the eye and condemn her again, Sigtrygg challenged. Here, now, with no counsel to hide behind, just a brother and a sister, and the truth between them. The clearing fell silent. Even the hounds seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their earlier baying replaced by watchful stillness. Eric stood frozen, his gaze locked with his sister's across the snow-covered ground. Something passed between them, a current of unspoken history, shared blood, mutual pain. Then, to the surprise of all present, Astrid spoke again. This time, her voice small but clear, carrying a question that struck at the heart of the matter. Why would I steal the blade that would one day be yours to pass to your own son, brother? What purpose would it serve me? It was a simple question, but devastating in its logic. Eric's face registered the impact, his certainty visibly wavering. For the first time since his arrival, he looked truly at his sister, not as a chieftain viewing a transgressor, but as a man seeing a wounded child.
The moment stretched, tension building like the pressure before a storm breaks. Then Håkon, the burly warrior who had been most vocal in the great hall, stepped forward. "Enough of this delay," he growled. "The girl was judged guilty. The outcast interferes with clan justice. Let us end this and return to the village." He made a motion toward his weapon, and instantly Sigtrygg's hand moved to his own axe. The air suddenly crackled with the potential for violence, both men poised on the edge of action. "Stand down, Håkon." Eric's command cut through the tension. The warrior hesitated, clearly reluctant to back away from confrontation. "Chieftain, the law?" "I said, stand down." Eric's voice left no room for argument this time. Håkon stepped back, his expression sullen but obedient. Eric turned his attention back to Sigtrygg and Astrid, his face now a mask of conflicting emotions, duty warring with doubt, authority with brotherly concern. "You ask me to question a judgment already rendered," he said, addressing Sigtrygg but looking at Astrid. "To undermine my own authority as chieftain. I ask you to seek truth," Sigtrygg replied, "even when it is inconvenient, even when it challenges what you believe. Is that not also the duty of a chieftain?" The question hung in the air between them, a challenge and an appeal both. Around them, the morning had brightened, sunlight glinting off the snow, creating a circle of light in which this pivotal moment would be decided. Eric stood motionless, the weight of his position visible in the set of his shoulders. Then, almost imperceptibly, something shifted in his stance. A relaxing, a decision reached. "The girl stays with you until the next council meeting," he declared, his voice carrying to all present. 3 days hence. There she will have the chance to speak her piece again, and the clan will judge anew. It was not a complete victory, but it was far more than Sigtrygg had dared hope for. A reprieve, a chance for truth to emerge, for justice to be reconsidered. He inclined his head, accepting the terms without showing too much relief. Astrid, however, could not contain her emotion so easily. "Thank you, brother," she said, her voice breaking slightly. Eirik did not acknowledge her gratitude directly. Instead, he turned to his men. "We return to the village, now." As the hunting party began to withdraw, Eirik lingered a moment longer. His gaze met Sigtrygg's, and something of their old understanding passed between them. Respect, if not trust. A recognition of principles held in common, despite all that had driven them apart. 3 days, the chieftain repeated. "Make them count, Berserker." With that, he turned and strode away, his men falling in behind him. The hounds led reluctantly from a scent they had been denied permission to pursue. Sigtrygg watched until they disappeared into the trees, only then allowing himself to exhale fully. Beside him, Astrid stood trembling, from cold, from fear, from the aftermath of courage displayed beyond her years. Without thinking, Sigtrygg placed a hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. "What happens now?" she asked, looking up at him with eyes that held equal measures of hope and trepidation. Sigtrygg gazed toward the village, invisible beyond the forest, but ever present in his consciousness. "Now," he said, "we prepare to face the council, and we find the truth about who really took that blade." The air between them changed, charged with purpose rather than fear. They had won a reprieve, not a pardon, but it was enough. Enough to begin unraveling the mystery that had nearly cost a child her life. Enough to challenge the justice that had failed them both. As they turned back toward the cabin, the sun broke fully through the clouds, casting their shadows long across the pristine snow. The towering figure of the warrior and the small, determined silhouette of the girl, connected now by a shared destiny neither could have foreseen. The council would meet in 3 days' time. Until then, they had work to do. When the sun rose the next morning, tinging the sky with a deep crimson that spilled across the snow like blood, Sigtrygg's cabin still stood, and beside him Astrid rose from her bed of furs, wounded but alive. The men of the clan had retreated, not out of cowardice, but from a grudging respect for the courage that the child and the Berserker had demonstrated together. Even Eirik, with his hard face and harder heart, had recognized a strength he could not simply destroy. That day there was no feast or celebration, only a heavy silence and a new understanding. Sigtrygg sat at his rough-hewn table, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of herbal tea, watching as Astrid carefully folded the extra furs he had lent her. Her movements were precise, deliberate, the actions of someone accustomed to being judged for every gesture. "The council will not be easily swayed," he said finally, breaking the silence that had lingered since their confrontation with Eirik's hunting party. "Most have already made their judgment of you, and of me." Astrid nodded, setting the folded furs aside before joining him at the table. "I know, but we have 3 days to find evidence that someone else took the ritual blade." Sigtrygg studied her face in the morning light. Despite everything, a determination burned in her eyes. Not the desperate fire of one facing execution, but the steady flame of someone seeking justice. It stirred memories of his own battle for fair judgment after Gorm's death, a battle he had ultimately lost.
"Who would want to frame you?" he asked. "Who benefits from your banishment?" Astrid's brow furrowed in thought. "Håkon has always disliked me," she said slowly. "He was against my father teaching me runes and battle strategy, said it wasn't fitting for a girl to learn such things." "Håkon is a traditionalist," Sigtrygg agreed, remembering the warrior's hostility in the clearing. "But stealing a sacred artifact seems extreme, even for him." "There's also Thyra, Eric's wife," Astrid continued, her voice dropping slightly. She never wanted me in the Great Hall. Said I reminded Eric too much of our mother, kept him tied to the past." Sigtrygg considered this. Thyra Thorvaldottir had married Eric shortly after he became chieftain, a political alliance that strengthened ties with a neighboring clan. She was known for her ambition and shrewd mind, and for her desire to establish her own influence within the clan hierarchy. "A wife who wishes to be the only voice in her husband's ear," he mused. "That has motivated many actions throughout history." Astrid nodded, a sadness passing across her features. "She's expecting their first child, a son, the seers say. The future chieftain." The implication hung between them. A woman securing her son's future by eliminating potential rivals or influences. It was not unheard of in clan politics, but to target a child, her husband's own sister? "We need more than suspicion," Sigtrygg said firmly. "The council will require proof." "How do we get that?" Astrid asked, practicality overtaking emotion. "We cannot enter the village. I am banished, and you—" She trailed off, not needing to articulate his own outcast status. Sigtrygg rose from the table, moving to the window to gaze toward Elderheim. The village lay just visible through the trees, smoke rising from multiple hearths into the clear winter sky. So close, yet separated from them by more than mere distance. "Not all in the village agree with your sentence," he said after a moment's thought. "I saw doubt in the faces of some warriors yesterday. And there must be others, friends, servants, who question what happened." "Helga," Astrid said suddenly, hope brightening her voice. "My father's old servant. She raised me after my mother died. She never believed I took the blade." "Could she help us?" Sigtrygg turned back to face her. Astrid nodded eagerly. "She moves freely through the Great Hall, and people speak openly before her, as if she were invisible. If anyone knows the truth, or could discover it—" "We need to get a message to her," Sigtrygg decided, "without alerting Eric or his supporters." A plan began to form between them. Careful, desperate, their only chance at redemption. They would need an intermediary, someone who could move between the cabin and village without arousing suspicion. Sigtrygg thought of Leif, the trader who occasionally brought him supplies, a man indebted to him for saving his son from drowning years before. Leif owed allegiance to commerce more than clan politics. He might be persuaded to carry messages. As the day progressed, their strategy took shape. Sigtrygg wrote a message on a scrap of birch bark, the runes small and precise, detailing what they needed from Helga. When darkness fell, he would travel to the crossroads where Leif often camped when visiting the area, hoping to find the trader there or leave the message in their prearranged hiding spot. Meanwhile, Astrid focused on recalling every detail of the days leading up to the blade's disappearance. Who had access to the Great Hall? Who knew her habits? Who might have been able to enter her sleeping quarters unseen? Each memory was a thread that might lead them to the truth, if only they could follow it to its source. By midday, Sigtrygg had begun preparing for his journey to the crossroads. He checked his weapons, packed a small sack of provisions, and studied the sky for signs of weather that might complicate his task. The sun shone bright overhead, but clouds gathered on the western horizon, promising snow by nightfall. "If I'm not back by morning," he told Astrid, "bar the door and stay inside. There's food enough for several days, and wood for the fire." The girl nodded, her expression solemn. "Be careful. If they catch you—" She didn't finish the thought, but she didn't need to. If Eric's men found Sigtrygg attempting to gather evidence that contradicted the official judgment, the tentative truce they had established would shatter. His life would be forfeit, and Astrid would face her original sentence once more. "I'll return before dawn," he promised, securing his cloak around his broad shoulders. As he prepared to depart, Astrid approached him, something clutched in her small hand. "Take this," she said, holding out a simple wooden pendant carved with Tyr's rune, the symbol of justice and righteous battle. Sigtrygg recognized it as the type of charm many warriors carried for protection. "Where did you get this?" "I made it," Astrid replied, "last night while you slept. From a piece of firewood." She looked almost embarrassed by the crude craftsmanship. "It's not much, but—" "It's perfect," Sigtrygg said, accepting the gift with more solemnity than its simple appearance might warrant. He slipped the leather cord over his head, tucking the pendant beneath his tunic, where it rested against his chest. "Thank you." The exchange was brief but significant, a token of trust between two people bound by circumstance and growing respect. As Sigtrygg departed, following a game trail that would keep him hidden from any watchers near the village, he found his hand straying occasionally to the wooden pendant, drawing strength from this tangible symbol of their shared purpose. The journey to the crossroads took longer than expected. Snow began falling earlier than Sigtrygg had anticipated, forcing him to move more cautiously through the increasingly treacherous terrain.
By the time he reached his destination, twilight had deepened into full darkness, the crossroads marked only by the skeletal silhouettes of 4 ancient oak trees against the night sky. To his relief, the glow of a small campfire was visible between the trees. Leif had indeed stopped here on his trading route. Approaching cautiously, Sigtrygg announced his presence before stepping into the circle of firelight, not wishing to startle a man who slept with weapons close at hand. "Sigtrygg Ravnsson," Leif greeted him, surprise evident in his weathered face. "It's been many moons since you sought company at my fire." "Necessity drives me tonight, old friend," Sigtrygg replied, accepting the trader's gesture to join him. As they shared Leif's simple meal of dried meat and hard bread, Sigtrygg carefully explained what he needed, omitting certain details, but making clear the urgency of delivering a message to Helga in the great hall. Leif listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. "You involve yourself in clan matters again," the trader observed when Sigtrygg had finished. "After 3 years of exile, why risk what peace you found?" Sigtrygg stared into the flames, considering his answer. "Peace built on injustice is no peace at all," he said finally, "just a slower death." Leif studied him for a long moment before nodding. "I've heard whispers about the chieftain's sister," he admitted. "Many question the evidence against one so young. Some say it was too convenient, her banishment coming just as Thyra announced her pregnancy." Hope flickered in Sigtrygg's chest. "Then you'll help us?" "I'll take your message to Helga," Leif agreed. "I'm due in Elderheim tomorrow to trade for furs. No one questions a merchant's movements." He hesitated, then added, "But be warned, the village is divided over this matter. Eric has supporters who believe questioning the judgment weakens his authority. They will not welcome any challenge." "We need only proof of the truth," Sigtrygg said. "Once found, even Eric must acknowledge it or risk losing the respect of the clan entirely." They spoke further into the night, refining the plan, addressing potential complications. When at last Sigtrygg departed, the message safely in life's possession, the snow had stopped, and stars glittered coldly overhead. The return journey seemed easier somehow, his purpose clearer, his resolve strengthened. He reached his cabin as the first hint of dawn light lightened the eastern sky. Opening the door quietly, he found Astrid asleep by the hearth, a small knife and piece of wood clutched in her hands. She had been carving something while waiting for his return. The sight stirred something protective in Sigtrygg's chest, a feeling he had thought long buried beneath years of isolation and bitterness. Careful not to wake her, he added wood to the dying fire, then settled into his chair to keep watch as she slept. They had taken their first step toward uncovering the truth. Now they could only wait and prepare for the council that would decide both their fates. The next 2 days passed in a rhythm of preparation and anticipation. Leif returned with a response from Helga, scratched hastily on a scrap of linen. The old servant confirmed Astrid's suspicions and promised to search for evidence that could exonerate her. More importantly, she revealed that the ritual blade, thought to be safely restored to its ceremonial place after Astrid's banishment, had disappeared again. "This changes everything," Sigtrygg said, reading the message aloud to Astrid. "If the blade is missing again while you're here with me, then someone else must have taken it both times," Astrid finished, her eyes bright with vindication. They spent hours discussing this new development, theorizing who might have stolen the blade again and why. Was it an attempt to reinforce Astrid's guilt, or had the original theft been merely the first step in a larger plan that required the artifact? On the morning of the 3rd day, the day of the council meeting, Leif arrived at the cabin earlier than expected, his expression grave. Helga had discovered something significant, he reported. The ritual blade had been found buried beneath the floor rushes in Thyra's private chamber, wrapped in a cloth bearing Astrid's distinctive needlework. "A clumsy attempt to maintain your guilt," Sigtrygg observed. "Thyra must not have expected the blade to be searched for so soon after your banishment." "But why would she take it at all?" Astrid wondered. "What does she gain beyond removing me?" The answer came from Leif, who had heard rumors while trading in the Great Hall. The blade is said to be necessary for a ritual Thyra plans to ensure her unborn son's claim to leadership. Some say she consults with a Volva from her home clan, practicing arts forbidden in Elderheim. The pieces fell into place with chilling clarity. Thyra had stolen the blade for her own purposes, framing Astrid to remove a potential obstacle to her ambitions. Now, with the council set to reconsider the judgment, she had grown desperate, making mistakes in her attempt to reinforce the deception. "Helga has spoken to others who suspect the truth," Leif continued. "She's not alone in her doubts. But Thyra has supporters, too. Men loyal to her father's clan, women she has favored with gifts and attention." "And Eirik?" Sigtrygg asked. "Where does the chieftain stand?" Leif's expression grew troubled. "Torn. He is a proud man, reluctant to admit he might have been deceived into condemning his own sister. Yet doubt gnaws at him. I saw it in his face when Helga reported the blade found in his wife's chamber." This was the crux of their challenge, Sigtrygg realized. Not just proving Astrid's innocence, but allowing Eirik a path to acknowledge his error without losing face before the clan. A delicate balance of truth and politics that would test even the most skilled negotiator. As midday approached, the traditional time for council gatherings, Sigtrygg and Astrid prepared themselves for the journey to the village center. They would not arrive as supplicants, but as equals demanding justice, their bearing as important as their words in swaying the assembled elders. Astrid donned the cleanest clothing Sigtrygg could provide, a tunic belted tightly to accommodate her smaller frame. She had washed her hair in melted snow, the pale blonde strands now clean and braided in a simple style that emphasized her youth while maintaining dignity. Around her neck hung a small pendant Sigtrygg had carved for her, a counterpart to the one she had made for him, marked with the rune for truth. For his part, Sigtrygg dressed with more care than he had shown in years. He trimmed his beard, bound his hair back from his face, and wore the least worn of his tunics beneath a cloak that had once marked him as a warrior of rank within the clan. His axe hung at his side, not as a threat, but as a symbol of his right to bear arms in council, a right he would reclaim this day. "Are you ready?" he asked Astrid as they stood before the cabin door. The girl took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the enormity of what lay ahead. "Whatever happens, we face it with truth." Sigtrygg nodded, placing a hand briefly on her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity between warriors facing battle, not protection offered to a child. Astrid had earned this respect through her courage and clear-sightedness in the days they had spent preparing their case. Together, they stepped outside into the crisp winter air, beginning the walk that would lead them either to vindication or to a final, irrevocable judgment. The path to Eldrheim stretched before them, a winding trail through snow-laden trees that seemed to mirror the uncertain journey from exile to potential acceptance. As they approached the village outskirts, people emerged from houses and workshops to watch their passage. Some faces showed hostility, others curiosity. A few even displayed cautious support. Word of their coming had clearly preceded them, the village already buzzing with anticipation of the unusual council session. The great hall stood at Eldrheim's center, its timber walls rising imposingly against the winter sky, carved dragon heads guarding its peaked roof. Before its massive doors, a crowd had gathered, clan members of all ranks, drawn by the promise of drama and the rare opportunity to witness justice reconsidered. Sigtrygg felt Astrid tense beside him as they neared the assembled villagers. Without breaking stride, he spoke quietly for her ears alone. "Remember who you are. Daughter of a chieftain, sister to the current leader, innocent of the charges against you. Walk with your head high." Astrid gave an almost imperceptible nod, squaring her small shoulders as they continued forward. The crowd parted reluctantly before them, whispers following in their wake like the rustle of dry leaves. At the great hall's entrance stood two of Eric's personal guards, their expressions impassive as they blocked the way. "The council gathers to hear the case of Astrid Ravnsdottir," Sigtrygg announced formally. "We come as summoned." For a tense moment, it seemed the guards might deny them entry. Then a voice called from within the hall, Eric's voice, commanding and clear. "Let them pass." The guards stepped aside, and Sigtrygg and Astrid entered the great hall of Eldrheim for the first time in years. He since his exile, she since her banishment. The familiar sense of wood smoke, mead, and humanity enveloped them, along with memories of a life once shared within these walls.
The hall's interior stretched before them, illuminated by firelight and the pale winter sun filtering through high windows. At its far end, upon the raised dais where clan leaders had sat for generations, Eric awaited them. Beside him, on a slightly lower seat, sat Thera, her pregnancy now visible beneath her elaborate gown, her face a mask of composed dignity that did not quite conceal the calculation in her eyes. Arrayed in a semicircle before the dais were the council members, 12 elders and warriors whose combined wisdom guided clan decisions. Among them, Sigtrygg recognized faces from his past. Gunnar the Elder, whose white beard seemed even longer now. Freydis the Wise, one of the few women to hold council position. Håkon the Strong, whose hostility radiated across the space between them. The hall fell silent as Sigtrygg and Astrid approached the central hearth, stopping at the prescribed distance from the chieftain's seat. Tradition dictated that they wait for Eric to speak first, acknowledging their presence before the formal proceedings began. For what seemed an eternity, Eric regarded them in silence, his sister in borrowed clothing too large for her slight frame, the exiled Berserker standing protectively at her side. Many emotions crossed the chieftain's face: anger, uncertainty, pride, and beneath it all, a flicker of something that might have been hope. Finally he spoke, his voice carrying to every corner of the hushed hall. Astrid Ravnsdottir, Sigtrygg Ravnsson, you stand before this council to contest a judgment lawfully rendered. He paused, his gaze moving between them. Speak your piece, and be judged anew by the wisdom of your clan. The challenge had been issued. Now, before the assembled power of Elderheim, they would make their case for truth, for justice, for redemption. The fate of a child hung in balance, and with it, perhaps, the very soul of the clan itself. Sigtrygg stepped forward, his movement deliberate and respectful.
Years of exile had not dimmed his understanding of council protocol. He inclined his head to Eric, not in submission, but in acknowledgment of the chieftain's position. "Honorable council," he began, his deep voice resonating through the hall. "We come before you not to challenge your authority, but to present new evidence that may have been unknown when judgment was first passed on Astrid Ravnsdottir." A murmur ran through the assembled crowd. Presenting new evidence was an accepted reason to reconsider a judgment, even one as serious as banishment. Eric leaned forward slightly, his interest evident despite his attempt at impassivity. "What evidence do you bring, Sigtrygg Ravnsson?" asked Gunnar the Elder, his ancient voice quavering but authoritative. Before Sigtrygg could respond, the great hall's side door opened and Helga entered. The old servant carried herself with dignity, despite her years and station, her gray hair neatly braided, her simple dress clean and proper. In her gnarled hands she held a cloth-wrapped bundle. "I bring the evidence, council members," Helga announced, her voice stronger than many expected. "I, who have served 3 generations of chieftains in this hall, who have kept its secrets and upheld its honor." Thyra shifted uncomfortably on her seat, her hand moving protectively to her swollen belly. Eric's gaze darted between his wife and the elderly servant, confusion evident in his expression. "Approach, Helga, and show what you have brought," Freydis the Wise commanded, her curiosity overriding protocol. As Helga moved toward the central hearth, Håkon rose to his feet, hand on sword hilt. "This is irregular," he protested. "The servant has no standing to present evidence in council." "Let her speak," Eirik countermanded, surprising many with his willingness to hear the old woman. "Helga has served my family loyally since before my birth. If she brings evidence, the council will consider it."
Helga reached the hearth, standing beside Sigtrygg and Astrid. With ceremonial slowness, she unwrapped the bundle in her hands, revealing the ritual blade. A magnificent dagger of ancient design, its iron blade inscribed with runes, its handle wrapped in leather, darkened by the oils of countless hands that had wielded it in sacred ceremonies. "The blade that Astrid was accused of stealing," Helga announced. "Found not once but twice in places where it should not have been. First among the child's possessions, placed there by hands not her own. And then—" She paused, her gaze moving deliberately to Thyra. "Beneath the floor rushes in the private chamber of our chieftain's wife." The hall erupted in shocked whispers. Thyra's face drained of color, though she maintained her rigid posture. Eirik turned to her, his expression unreadable, before addressing Helga again. "You claim my wife placed the blade among my sister's belongings?" His tone was carefully neutral, giving away nothing of his own thoughts. "I make no claims without proof," Helga replied. She reached into a pouch at her waist and withdrew a small object, a ring bearing Thyra's family crest. "This was found beside the blade in your wife's chamber. It must have slipped from her finger when hiding the artifact." Thyra's hand moved instinctively to her own hand, where the absence of the ring was now conspicuous. "This proves nothing," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "The ring could have been stolen, placed there to implicate me, just as the blade was supposedly placed to implicate Astrid. It was a clever defense, turning the accusation back on itself." Several council members nodded thoughtfully, seeing the logic in her argument. But Helga was not finished. "There is more," the old servant continued. She turned to address the council directly. "3 nights before the blade's first disappearance, I observed Lady Thyra meeting secretly with a vulva from her father's clan, a practitioner of arts forbidden within Elderheim's walls. They spoke of rituals requiring the blade, of securing the unborn child's claim through means beyond natural succession. This revelation struck at the heart of clan beliefs. Using forbidden magic to manipulate leadership succession was not merely a crime against clan law, but a transgression against the gods themselves. Even those who had been skeptical now looked at Thyra with new suspicion. Thyra rose to her feet, her composure cracking. "These are lies, the word of a servant against mine. I am the daughter of Thorvald the Fair, wife to your chieftain, mother to the next leader of this clan." Her voice rose with each declaration, her hand protectively cradling her pregnant belly. "Your parentage and position do not place you above truth," Sigtrygg said calmly, addressing her directly for the first time. "Nor does Astrid's youth make her a convenient sacrifice for your ambitions." Eirik had remained silent throughout this exchange, his face a study in conflicting emotions. Now he rose from his seat, commanding attention by his presence alone. "Serious accusations have been made," he said, his voice level despite the tension evident in his bearing. "This council must consider all evidence carefully before rendering judgment." He turned to Astrid, who had remained quiet beside Sigtrygg. "You have been silent, sister. What say you in your own defense?" All eyes turned to the small figure in oversized clothing.
Astrid stepped forward, her movement unhurried, her gray eyes clear and direct as she addressed her brother and the council. "I did not take the ritual blade," she said simply, "not the first time, nor the second. I have never sought power or position within our clan, only to learn and grow in the traditions of our ancestors." She paused, glancing briefly at Thyra before continuing. "I understand fear. I understand ambition, but I do not understand betraying one's own family for either." The sincerity in her voice reached even those most skeptical of her innocence. Here was no cunning manipulator, but a child speaking truth as she knew it, plainly, without embellishment or accusation. The council chamber fell into contemplative silence, broken only by the crackling of the central hearth fire. After a moment, Freydis the Wise rose from her seat, addressing Eric directly. "Chieftain, I move that we deliberate these matters in private council. The evidence presented warrants careful consideration away from," she glanced meaningfully at the crowded hall, "potentially inflaming influences." Eric nodded his agreement. "The council will withdraw to consider judgment. All others will remain here until our return." As the 12 council members filed toward the private chamber adjoining the great hall, tension thickened the air. Thyra remained standing, isolated now on the dais, her earlier confidence replaced by barely concealed anxiety. Eric paused at the chamber door, looking back at his wife with an expression of profound disappointment before disappearing inside. The wait that followed seemed interminable. Sigtrygg and Astrid returned to their position by the hearth, neither speaking but drawing strength from each other's presence. Helga joined them, her duty as witness fulfilled, but her concern for Astrid evident in the way she occasionally patted the girl's arm reassuringly. Throughout the hall, clusters of clan members spoke in hushed voices, debating the evidence and speculating on the council's likely decision. Some glanced sympathetically toward Astrid, while others directed hostile stares at Thyra, who had retreated to a bench at the edge of the dais, a protective hand still covering her unborn child. When at last the council chamber door reopened, the hall fell instantly silent. The council members emerged first, their faces solemn as they resumed their seats. Eric followed, his bearing somehow both heavier and more resolute than before. He returned to the chieftain's chair, standing before it rather than sitting. "This council has reached its decision," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of formal judgment. "Having considered all evidence presented, we find that Astrid Ravnsdottir was wrongfully accused and unjustly banished. Her sentence is hereby revoked. She is restored to her place within this clan, with all rights and protections thereof." A collective exhalation seemed to pass through the hall, relief from some, surprise from others. Astrid's posture changed subtly, a tension releasing from her small shoulders as the burden of exile lifted. Eric continued, his gaze now moving to his wife. "Thyra Thorvaldottir is found to have committed crimes against this clan and its sacred traditions. She has stolen a ritual artifact, falsely accused another, and sought forbidden magic to secure power." His voice hardened. "The traditional punishment for such offenses is death." Thyra's face went ashen, her hands clutching protectively at her belly. A shocked murmur ran through the hall. Executing a pregnant woman, especially one carrying the chieftain's heir, was almost unheard of. "However," Eric continued, raising a hand for silence, "in consideration of the innocent life she carries, this council commutes that sentence. Thyra Thorvaldottir will be escorted to the borders of her father's clan territory, never to return to Elderheim on pain of death."
It was a merciful judgment by clan standards, though no less devastating to the woman who had schemed to secure her position as the chieftain's wife and mother to his heir. Thyra's face crumpled, years of careful plotting undone in a single pronouncement.
Finally, Eirik turned to Sigtrygg, his expression softening slightly. Sigtrygg Ravnsson, your actions in protecting my sister and seeking justice on her behalf have demonstrated the qualities this clan once valued in you. Your own sentence of exile is reduced. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. You may settle on clan lands, though not within the village itself. Your skills as a warrior and smith will be welcomed should you choose to offer them. It was not a complete restoration. The shadow of Gormskallagrimsson's death still hung between them, but it was more than Sigtrygg had dared hope for. A chance to live among people again, to contribute, to rebuild some semblance of the life he had lost. The council's judgment is rendered, Eirik concluded. Let it be recorded in our sagas and honored by all who hear it. With these traditional words, the formal proceedings ended. The tension that had gripped the hall began to dissipate, replaced by the buzz of conversation as clan members absorbed the dramatic reversals they had witnessed. Guards moved to escort Thyra from the dais, her fate sealed by her own ambition. Astrid remained beside Sigtrygg, seemingly unsure what to do next. After 3 days of exile and the ordeal of public judgment, the sudden restoration of her place within the clan left her momentarily adrift. It was Helga who broke the uncertainty, enfolding the girl in a fierce embrace. "Welcome home, child," the old servant whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down her weathered cheeks. Over Helga's shoulder, Astrid's eyes met Sigtrygg's. In them he read gratitude, relief, and a question. What now? For himself? For her? For the strange bond that had formed between them in their brief time together? Before he could respond, Eirik approached them, having descended from the dais. The chieftain's formal manner had given way to something more personal, more vulnerable, as he faced his sister.
"Astrid," he began, his voice low enough that only those closest could hear. "I failed you. As chieftain, as brother. I allowed evidence to blind me to truth, protocol to override blood." Astrid regarded him steadily, neither rushing to forgive nor holding to bitterness. "You did what you believed was right," she said finally. "As did I, in maintaining my innocence, even when no one would listen." A shadow of pain crossed Eirik's features at her words, a reminder of how alone she had been in her ordeal. He turned to Sigtrygg, extending a hand in the warrior's gesture of respect. "Thank you for protecting her when I did not," he said simply. Sigtrygg accepted the offered hand, feeling the weight of years of exile lifting somewhat with this acknowledgment. "She has her father's courage," he replied, "and her brother's determination. She did as much to protect herself as I did." Eirik nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "That she did." He hesitated, then added, "The council's judgment stands. You are welcome on clan lands. But I would add a personal request. Stay near. Astrid will need someone who understands what she has endured." The implication was clear. Exile changed a person, created wounds that those who had never experienced it could not fully comprehend. Astrid would need guidance from someone who had walked that path and returned. "I will remain at my cabin," Sigtrygg agreed. "Close enough if needed, far enough for peace." With matters settled, at least for the moment, the hall began to empty as clan members returned to their daily lives.
carrying with them the dramatic tale to share with those who had not witnessed it firsthand. Sigtrygg prepared to depart as well, his purpose fulfilled, his path forward clearer than it had been in years. As he moved toward the door, a small hand caught his, stopping him. He looked down to find Astrid beside him, her expression earnest.
"Will I see you again?" she asked, the question carrying layers of meaning beyond its simple words. Sigtrygg knelt to bring himself to her eye level, a gesture of respect rather than condescension. "I will be where I have always been," he told her, "and my door will always be open to you, Astrid Ravnsson." She nodded, satisfied with this promise. Then, with the directness that seemed so characteristic of her, she embraced him briefly before stepping back. "Thank you," she said, "for believing me when no one else would." No grand speeches, no elaborate expressions of gratitude, just the simple acknowledgement of the most fundamental gift one person can offer another: belief in their truth when the world has turned away. Sigtrygg rose, inclining his head to her in farewell before turning to depart. As he stepped outside, the winter air felt somehow less bitter than before, the path ahead less isolating. Behind him, Elderheim continued its daily rhythms, changed irrevocably by what had transpired within its great hall. The village of Elderheim was never the same after that day. Stories of the judgment spread quickly, transforming into legends that would be told for generations. The tale of a child wrongfully banished, a berserker who defied his own exile to protect her, a chieftain who found the courage to admit his error, and a woman whose ambition led to her downfall, all became woven into the fabric of clan identity. Between the fire that had warmed the night when Sigtrygg first found Astrid in the snow, and the ice that had nearly frozen her heart against hope, they had discovered something profound. True honor lies not in blind adherence to tradition or authority, but in the courage to protect those whom others have abandoned, even when it means facing one's own clan. In the weeks that followed, Sigtrygg continued his solitary existence at the edge of clanlands, but the quality of his solitude had changed. No longer was it the bitter isolation of the outcast, but the chosen quietude of a man who had made peace with his place in the world. Occasionally Astrid would visit, sometimes bringing small gifts from the village, fresh bread, a new hunting knife, news of clan happenings. They would sit by his hearth, sharing simple meals and comfortable silences, bound by an understanding that needed few words to sustain it. Eirik, too, made the journey to Sigtrygg's cabin several times, initially to discuss practical matters regarding Astrid's welfare, later to seek counsel on clan decisions from a perspective untainted by village politics. Slowly, cautiously, the broken trust between them began to heal, not to what it had been before Gorm's death, but to something new, tempered by shared experience and mutual respect. Thyra departed for her father's lands as sentenced, escorted to the border by Eirik himself, a final act of respect for the mother of his child, despite her betrayal. Months later, word reached Elderheim that she had given birth to a son, but had not survived the difficult delivery. The child remained with his maternal grandfather's clan, a potential bridge between the communities when wounds had healed enough to permit such connections. Astrid grew stronger in body and spirit with each passing day, the trauma of her banishment gradually receding, though never entirely forgotten. She resumed her studies of runes and clan history, encouraged now by Eirik rather than merely tolerated. In the eyes of many, she had become a symbol of resilience and vindication, proof that truth, though sometimes obscured, would eventually emerge if one had the courage to stand firm. As for Sigtrygg, the former Berserker found a measure of redemption he had never thought possible. Though he chose to maintain his distance from village life, he was no longer shunned when business or necessity brought him to Elterheim.
Children no longer fled at his approach. Women did not hurry to other sides of pathways. Men nodded in greeting rather than reaching instinctively for weapons. One crisp autumn evening, as the first snow of the new winter began to dust the landscape, Sigtrygg stood outside his cabin watching the flakes spiral down from a darkening sky. The sight brought memories of that night nearly a year before, a small form huddled in the snow, a decision that had changed everything. From behind him came the sound of approaching footsteps, familiar in their pattern. He did not turn, knowing who would join him. "It's starting again," Astrid said, coming to stand beside him, her breath clouding in the cold air. "The snow." Sigtrygg nodded, his gaze still on the falling flakes. "Another winter arrives." "But not like the last," she observed, a wealth of meaning in those simple words. They stood in companionable silence, watching as the world was slowly transformed, made new again beneath winter's blank canvas. After a time, Astrid spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "Helga says that in the old stories, snow doesn't just cover things, it preserves them, keeps them safe until spring comes to reveal them again." She glanced up at him, like truth. Sigtrygg considered this, finding wisdom in the comparison. "Truth and snow," he agreed. "Both can be disturbed by careless hands. Both can blind if faced without preparation. Both reveal what lies beneath when the time is right." Astrid smiled, a full, genuine expression that transformed her serious face into that of the child she still was, despite all she had endured. "And both are better faced with a friend beside you," she added. As darkness settled fully around them, they turned back toward the cabin's welcoming light. Behind them, their footprints marked the fresh snow, the large, steady impressions of the warrior, and the smaller, equally determined tracks of the girl. No longer parallel paths, but a shared journey neither could have imagined when fate first brought them together. That night, between the fire and the ice, they understood that compassion could indeed be a Viking's strongest weapon, and that sometimes the greatest battles won are not those fought with steel, but with the courage to stand for truth when all others turn away. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.